think I've got 4 minutes. Should be plenty. Okay. A bit of a sigh of relief actually in hearing what Pam's had to say, because our modest report by comparison fortunately does dovetail with what you've been telling us. I was a little bit worried that we have got this completely wrong and you'd wipe the floor with us, but I think we're okay. Oh, what's happened there? Oh, the back. Okay. Right. Okay, so I'm going to talk about this, as I say, modest report. Though if you look at it, it is 80 pages. Don't be put off by that. Much of that is appendices, and the experts group that I'll tell you about in a moment really helped us condense the real meat of it to the first part of the report. So it's all there in the 80 pages, but you don't have to read it all to get the real gist of it. So it was commissioned by the Jisc. It's been as a sort of gestation period for quite a long time, and a few of the people in this room have been involved in this project in one way or another, and will remember that it was a year ago that we were doing a lot of work on it. We finished writing it around December, and then for whatever reasons it didn't get published till May. So this event actually works quite well from that point of view, in that, taking the summer out of it, it actually hasn't been available that long, but it is published, and you can get hold of it via the Jisc site. It's part of Jisc's work on open scholarship and science agenda, and well, I'll tell you what it's about. But first, yes, myself and Rob Allen have written the report. We were both part of the computer science School of Computer Science and Agriculture for many years. More recently, we've been doing some consultancy work and so on. We worked a lot with Jisc, as you've heard, and we work for a little organisation that consists of the pair of us, which is called HAPSIS, and I've completely forgotten why we're called that. But we had input from Jisc staff. Rachel's name's already come up. Is anybody else here from Jisc, by the way? Okay, right. Well, I don't work for Jisc, but I have worked for them a lot in the past, and obviously this report was commissioned by them. Don Fripp, Baz Cordviner, again, names you may have come across in this area. All three of them are very well known in the open science area. And then we had an experts group that advised us and told us where we were getting things wrong and pushed us in the right direction and opened up their contacts to us. And again, one or two of those are here today, including Susanna, who's going to be speaking a bit later. And again, I think most of those names there you'll probably be familiar with. So what I've done here, as I say, it's an 80-page report. I've just picked out a few bits and pieces in the few minutes I have to talk to you about. Obviously, I'd encourage you to take a look at it if you haven't already at a later date. So the aims of the project, well, they were really about us, or Jisc, wanting to find out where we are with FAIR, and I should say we focus very much on FAIR, where our report, again, is much narrower than Pam's report. We only focus on FAIR. Jisc wanted to find out, well, Jisc is a membership organisation, and I think really what they commissioned the report for was to find out whether there was an appetite in the UK research community for Jisc to do more work in this area, and if so, what should they do? So they commissioned the report for us to find out where are we with FAIR? Do we understand it? Does the community understand it? Does it know about it? Does it know what it is? And what about across disciplines? Is there anything we can draw from what's going on in the different disciplines? Obviously, there are some disciplines, and well, crystallography, again, as mentioned, is one that would be seen as one of the leading disciplines in this area, whereas there are many others that are in a long tail behind that. And if there is a role for Jisc, what is it? What should they do? Or should they be actually encouraging other people to do things? So there, I won't go through all those. You can see them yourselves in the report. I think I've probably covered them in what I've said anyway. We had some challenges. As I said, a very small group of us working on it, which meant we only had a small sample of the overall research community. And we realised that even though we've done the report, there are big gaps. It's a sample. The people that we interviewed, to some degree, were self-selecting and often had perhaps more knowledge than is true across the whole community. Many of them we found through the mailing lists, through our contacts with the experts groups, through personal contact and so on, because we needed people who were willing to spend a bit of time talking to us for no reward. We particularly had trouble trying to engage research practitioners. Well, I'll talk a little bit more about some of the focus groups that we ran in a moment, but you know, these people, they just want to get on with their research. They don't particularly want to talk to us about the data management. Fortunately, a few of them did, enough for us to be able to draw some conclusions from our report. So before we got started with talking to people, we did a bit of background work, as you'd expect, and we did a quick and dirty review of what we can see out there on the UK's university websites. Is FAIR mentioned anywhere? Does it? This is a year ago, so it may have changed a little bit. Obviously, we looked at the Russell Group first, as that's where most of the research is taking place. But we did look at all of them. We also looked to see if they were mentioning explicitly their data management. Then we looked more into their research data management guidelines and looked at all of the Russell Group and quite a large sample of the other universities as well, looking at what guidance they were offering. We tried to, well, initially looked at where FAIR was explicitly mentioned, but we also tried to look at, well, guidance that actually was talking about FAIR, even though it perhaps didn't explicitly mention it. Looked at which elements were covered, and as probably many of you know already, some elements of FAIR are much more covered than others. We particularly found interoperability as an area that is very low in terms of how much guidance is available. And we also looked for mentions of the Horizon 2020 guidelines, because that, we felt, was a driver for many organisations starting to look at FAIR in terms of their guidance. As I said, we did interviews with research practitioners. These were the 4 subject areas that were selected fairly randomly. I have to admit there wasn't particularly any logic to why they were chosen. 1 or 2 of them you may think, well, they're obvious because they're already doing a lot. But we did try and, with digital humanities and with social sciences, bring in people who are perhaps not as involved or have not been as involved in the past. We had a sort of a script that we would work through with each interview with various questions and looking at, you know, whether they understood what FAIR means and levels of awareness and what support they had and so on. Many of these interviews went on much longer than we expected and ranged much wider than FAIR, and sometimes researchers really wanted to vent their spleen on what they were upset about in their research field, but we managed to distill it down a little bit to what we were trying to get to. We also ran some focus groups in London and in Newcastle, at the British Library and at the Centre for Life in Newcastle. And we had a reasonable number of attendees. A lot of enthusiasm from the research support professionals, you know, people from libraries and research groups, data groups. We worked really hard to get some researchers to come along as well, and we had a reasonable number. And we worked through a number of activities, you know, lots of flip charts and all that sort of thing that we distilled as part of the report. We looked at their challenges, the gaps, what they understood already about FAIR, and also asked them how they thought FAIR should be taken forward within the research community. We did 1 or 2 other smaller activities. Some of you may have attended the Jisc Research Data Network event in York last year. We had a panel session there, which Baz Cordiner from Jisc chaired and we were part of. The experts group met both online and face-to-face on several occasions to advise us. And we interviewed a small sample of funders and publishers. In fact, we had people we talked to people from Springer and Elsevier, Wellcome, and 1 or 2 of the research councils as well. Although we weren't focused so much, I must say, on the funders and publishers, we were more focused on researchers. I probably should say about our findings and recommendations. Again, for many of the people here, you may think, well, yeah, that's just obvious. Yeah, and much of it is. You know, we weren't expecting to come up with anything particularly groundbreaking. I think just wanted us to be able to perhaps confirm what was anecdotal and what people were saying to them. 1 or 2 things maybe were surprising. So just pulling out a few things here. I think we were a little surprised about the confusion or lack of knowledge around data ownership. Again, researchers getting on with the research and not really caring too much about who that data belonged to once it had been produced. And in some cases, not caring too much about what happens to it either, which we were a little bit surprised about. A lot of inconsistency across the piece, and maybe that reflects a little bit the maturity of FAIR at the moment. People who have latched onto it as a brand have a basic, simple knowledge of it, but have picked out the bit of it that interests them rather than seeing it as a whole. A lot of people saying, yeah, we need tools and resources to help us with this, software tools particularly. But machine readability was something that very few people seem to want to talk about, although our impression was this is pretty important, and people should be looking at this area. Many of the researchers were not concerned at all about the machine readability of what they were producing, even when they were producing vast amounts of data. Particularly in some areas where there's a lot of, for example, video and images being produced, which can be vast, as I say, but not too much interest in machine readability. Well, I just mentioned, where there are vast volumes. Another area that was quite surprising to us was how much raw data is lost that people produce, and then just is the cost of storage, I guess, or the cost of management of that data is too much and is just lost once it's been processed. And lots of talk about metadata, or the lack of it, or the way in which some people get round having to produce it, almost. They just see it as too much of an overhead and something that isn't really of interest to them. They just want to get on with their research, get on with their producing publications, get on with their grant applications. Jisc were particularly keen for us to look at differences across disciplines. I think this was in some ways a little bit, well, perhaps disappointing is the wrong word, but an area that didn't generate as much interesting content as we'd hoped. I think there are some of the differences within disciplines are greater than between disciplines. In some areas, you've got people who are very switched on to managing their data, whereas within the same subject area, others who have no interest whatsoever. And obviously huge variation in types of data. One of the focus groups, one piece of, well, is it data? Is somebody said, well, what do I do about Jack Nicholson's underpants? And what that person meant was that their institution was the archive for the Stanley Kubrick archive, and part of that were the underpants that feature in the movie The Shining, and they physically hold those underpants in their archive. What does FAIR got to say about those? I think it was a rhetorical question, but anything else I want to say there? Yeah, I think, well, as we've already been talking about the burden of data management and whether FAIR is going to increase that burden and how is that going to be paid for. That they were, within different disciplines, some felt much more pressure to get the publications done and move on with their career, not thinking too much about what happens to the data that they've produced as part of their research. I don't think there's much to say there. That's pretty much mother and apple pie, really. That they're things that I think most people would agree on. Most people seem to think that FAIR is a good thing. That it goes beyond open access, where people had a view about open access. That there is some flexibility as well as some clarity within FAIR, and it could be useful in supporting lots of different types of research data. Okay, so in terms of our recommendations, I think they sort of coalesced around 2 or 3 themes. One of them, again, which Pam was talking about as well, was about resources and training and skills and tutorials and so on. And this was an area that many felt this could be something that Jisc could help with. That there was a gap in the market there that could be filled by Jisc, a real lack of knowledge. That some of the existing resources, which might be very good, perhaps need a refresh with a view to FAIR. That they've been around a while, that they predate FAIR possibly, but with a little bit of work could be FAIRized. as if that's a word. That Jisc or other organisations might get involved in producing more software tools to help in terms of data management and ensuring that data is fair. There are lots of case studies around already, but could they be adapted and again be fairised, or new ones created to help with this gap in knowledge at the moment? And also there should be more coordination between stakeholders, much more coordination was what was felt by many of the people that we talked to, that they were getting different messages from the different stakeholders, from different funders, from government, from their own institutions. That could be a role for Jisc, possibly. Yeah, well, those who were a bit more knowledgeable talked quite a lot about fair metrics and the groups that are working in the area of fair metrics, and how support from the stakeholders could help people, help researchers and research institutions and organisations keep up with that work. That perhaps at the moment the dissemination of that work perhaps isn't getting to everyone. But again, people like us who are already focused in this area may know about it, but the vast majority of people working in research and supporting research don't. And finally, you mentioned a roadmap, I think, as well. Well, again, a roadmap within the area for FAIR that could almost be a template for institutions to take and apply their local characteristics to that roadmap. Again, perhaps Jisc could do that, almost a template roadmap that they could use. So as I say, most of those recommendations coalesced around resources, tools, particularly software tools, and the coordination of effort. Perhaps I should have added dissemination in there as well, disseminating much of the work that's going on within the UK and internationally. Okay, I feel like I've whizzed through there pretty quickly, not quite 4 minutes, but fairly fast. So the Jisc report has been made available, as I say, if you haven't seen it already. The easiest, I didn't want to put a really long link up there, but the easiest way to get to it is from the For Research page at Jisc, which also has information about other work that's going on. The research data shared service work, for example, is available from there, which is relevant to what we're talking about here. I think, yeah, that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
I feel like I've rushed through a bit.
Gained a few minutes there.
Yes.
Apologies for
so conscious of the time.
Any questions for Dave?
Thank you for your talk, Charlie Groban from QMUL. Actually, Jack Nicholson's underwear prompted me to think about fair data for physical objects like architecture, buildings, or design objects. So, on these faculties do research. They are not just artists; they are also scientists and researchers who are developing new methods, new technologies. So, how do you define fair for a design or an architecture?
Well, I don't know if anybody else wants to come in there, because I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer that question, to be honest. I mean, that's a question we ask in the report, to be honest. Yeah, we can think about it, couldn't we? Certainly make it findable, can't we? Yeah. How accessible can Jack Nicholson's underpants be? I'm not sure. Particularly where you have things that are clearly fragile, but obviously digitized versions could be available.
No, because probably that particular example is not really necessarily reusable, but like you might need a design or an architectural design to be reused for education or research or purposes.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering, because we are also battling with that, because at TDOC we have a data steward for every faculty, and the Faculty of Industrial Design and Architecture. They are like, oh, we don't do data. But,
yes.
You know?
Yes. Yeah, so, and that was and again we discussed that in the report about what is data. You know, how far do we stretch that definition? You know, because you could stretch it to be pretty much everything if you wanted. You could stick digital on there, I suppose, and that would narrow it down. And then you're looking at digitizing everything.
No, but you could be more pragmatic. Like, let's say a researcher at architecture faculty has applied for a grant, and they are expected to make their data, whatever that is, open. So what is it? So that's, and how is it fair?
Yeah.
Yeah. These are. I mean, I don't have the answer. That's why I'm here.
Okay. Does anybody else have comment on that? Yeah.
It's not a comment, it's not an answer. But more just to back up, I think there's a lot of confusion over what data you do have to share and what is beneficial to invest in making fair.
Yeah.
Because I think we have to realize it takes time and effort to make this stuff understandable and reusable in that sense. And I think there's still quite a lot of confusion between the high level, fair principles and what it means in practice. And I think,
I think that's one of the things that came out is that I suppose it's a great advantage of fair, but it's also a problem in that it can mean everything, but the danger is it will end up meaning nothing. And I think we've been around that route before, haven't we? Yeah.
Thank you for your talk, and sorry that if I made you have to rush. I did ask Bill.
No, it's fine. That's my fault.
So, in terms of what is data, I mean, I think every task force or group that's asked to consider this starts with that, and after about 4 or 5 sessions, driving themselves nuts, going around in circles, asking what is data. You have to decide on something. I mean, because we had the discussion about, well, should you keep every sample? For example, crystallography, we mentioned, you get the data. Well, I mean, if you really wanted to make it reproducible, and you'd get the sample as well, not just the data that came from the sample, so somebody could take it and remeasure it and agree or disagree. But that starts to become, do you keep every sample that's from all around the world? It just becomes
laboratory notebooks was brought up, as an example as well. The physical notebooks.
So if we go back to the Concordat, which is what we've agreed to, it says data underlying publications. So that would be a place to start.
Yeah. Okay.
I think so that at least gives you a restriction, and then you can sort of say to yourself, well, logically, then do we say we only want the data, or if it's an important publication, do we require the sample, and then how do we go about that? For example, it doesn't answer the architecture question because they've got their own, but presumably you have to go to a sub-discipline level there and ask them what was reasonable. I don't think you can come with a high level principle without going down to the discipline level and saying, what does this mean for you, effectively? So that's just fine.
Yeah.
Both comment here.
Just a quick comment on the earlier discussion about what needs to be made fair and depending on the digital artifact. So I think the distinction here is the principle really cover how you can make something fair and what are the underpinning, the technology you need to do it. But it's actually clearly said that it's left to the community to decide if that digital object, first of all, it's actually should be fair or it's just discoverable, it's enough for that community, for the purpose of that digital object. So I think that's the distinction that you're right. I mean, wanted information is sometimes not well communicated, or if it's communicated, probably it should be actually explained even more. So it's a very good point.
Yeah, and I think to go back to the costs, it's this notion, I think we've all kind of agreed that this notion of anything that underpins published findings should be retained. That's a great place to start. But it kind of drives home the need to really think about this from the outset, and sometimes you don't know until you've got the publication. And at that point, I think it's coming back to your interoperable point, and that tends to be some of the most expensive part, apart from the metadata and capturing all of this understanding. So it's really that kind of moving a lot of this stuff forward and getting people thinking about it early, and it's very hard to get that right. So it's not, I don't have any answers, unfortunately, but I think that's a key problem for us to face going forward.
Did you want to? Yeah. Just while the microphone's getting there, also, of course, again, we're slightly in danger here that we are, going back to Henry's point, we are slightly mixing up open and fair, and I think particularly in this context we do need to try and keep them separate, because just because we think something's got to be open doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be fair, and vice versa.
Hello, I'm Tam Cooper from the University of Kent Research Support Librarian. And coming from the kind of the sticky end of the policies about what is research data, and talking to different researchers, I think we have to be extremely sensitive about how we define data. And when we go for the easy wins, like as in, oh, it's the stuff that supports publications, we risk really upsetting sort of at least half of the researchers at my university whose research outputs are already, they feel discriminated against because they aren't publications, they are artifacts, they are other things, and they are the unknown unknowns where only 3% of our outputs that is on our repository are not put to journal articles and conference papers. And we're engaged in really trying to bring them back into the fold and say, okay, how can we support your research outputs, how you define them, and then of course what do we call their data that they don't call data.
I completely agree with you. It's something that that was the most interesting aspect that came out of the multidiscipline side of what we looked at, was that clearly in many research areas things are driven by publications, and it's very easy to lose all of that other work that's going on that isn't driven by publication. That was, as I say, probably the most interesting thing that came out of the discipline work that we did.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.